layers is not what I'm an expert on and not what I care to do the research on to know, as we learned earlier, the corner cases of, of layers, right? So, and if I try to do it, you'd be bored to tears, I promise you. You need to be able to discuss and answer questions as an expert. And so as you're picking a topic, what is something you can speak highly about, educated about, so if somebody has a question you can answer, so you can fill those gaps in people's information. For me, presenting is something I could talk about pretty easily. I could talk a lot about music history and music theory too, but that's not quite relevant for what we're doing. If you're asked to give a presentation you're unfamiliar with, do the research first. You don't want to get locked into giving a presentation on something that you don't think you either can or something that won't interest you. You don't want to be bored to tears while you spend weeks researching. Do the first initial research and then figure it out.
Sí, me di
Yeah,
cuenta.
we got somebody here joining in the background.
Sorry about that. Forgot my mic was open.
It happens. And then the other thing you need to do is evaluating the time it will take to prepare and create the presentation. We all have really busy lives. I'm a full-time professor, and this summer, and due to COVID, I've been a full-time stay-at-home dad to a now 7-month-old. And so I knew that I wasn't going to have time to present on something brand new, unfamiliar to me. I knew if I wanted to present and be helpful, it had to be something related to something I knew already about. And I thought, after being at a few judge conferences and being in many, many professional level conferences in my field, that presenting is a topic that nobody talks about. You're just expected to be able to do it. So for me, it made sense. When creating a presentation, building the actual what you're going to say, what it looks like, here are the things I follow. I would tell all my students to use a provided template. The reason is because those templates are there because they're visually appealing to your audience. They are used again and again for this reason. If you decide to do something different, you're taking a risk at a visual part of your presentation that may just not work. This is called Circuit. This is the one I use for everything. In fact, all of my class lectures use this. All of my professional presentations use it. I like the way it looks. It's neat, and the little design on the edge, it frames it while not being interfering with the text. Also, keep the same font the template uses. This is the font that came with it. If you're going to change it, you got to keep it simple. Notice this font has lots of neat straight lines. There's no big giant curves on the end of letters. It's not ornate. I remember being in middle school and doing presentations and trying to find the cool font. And unfortunately, the cool font does not always work for presentations. The idea behind our presentations want everybody to understand and learn. If they're trying to figure out if that's an S or a 5 or a G, they're not going to be focused on you. Instead, they're going to be focused on the picture. Be aware of your text size. If you go too small, it's unreadable. Now, we don't really have that. We don't really have that difficulty here because we're all a foot and a half away from our screen. If I was presenting at a normal judge conference, or at least the ones I've been to, there's a small or medium-sized screen in the front of the room, and then there's about 20 people trying to get as far away from it as they can to be part of the cool kids in the back of the room. So with that in mind, this would show better if we were in a bigger room, because with these different text sizes, you can read them a foot away. Now, if I wrote in 14-point font from the back of the room, you wouldn't be able to read it. Probably 16, you wouldn't be able to read it. I recommend not going anywhere below 20 if you can help it. I used some 18 in this version of the presentation just because we are so close to the screen. More slides are better than smaller text. I can't tell you how many presentations I've seen where they have 20 bullet points on one topic, right? Don't do that. More slides are totally fine. I've only been at one presentation where I've been asked to keep my slides to a minimum. Right? Everybody else is fine with using that. Imagine if I had all the creating the presentation information from last slide and the stuff that's going to be on this slide all packed into one. You couldn't read it, right? So we want to make sure that it's legible. Avoid black and white backgrounds. I say that because they're difficult to read based on the lighting condition. The last judge conference I was at was in the storage room of a store. And there was about 2 dangling overhead lights that weren't very good to begin with, but they were turned off for the projector. And because of that, you couldn't see the person's presentations very well that were in black and white. A little bit of color goes a long way. Uh, Also, with that in mind, your audience will appreciate a little bit of color. It breaks the monotony. It's not saying, look how creative I am, but it tends to make you pay attention more. There have been studies done on students in education settings like middle school, elementary school, about who pays attention to what more, and your eyes tend to get dragged towards color with statements on it rather than plain white with statements on it. I'd encourage you to create an outline of your presentation to help keep your slides on track and as you develop your presentation. In my office, I have a 5-page outline of this presentation because as I was creating it, I made sure to make an outline of everything I wanted to cover under each topic. Typically, I build a handout at the same time. It's because I want to make sure as I'm building my outline, I can go, well, I don't have enough time to put this in the presentation. Instead, let me put information about this in the handout. With that in mind, you have a handout. It's in the Room 1 text. It's uploaded as a PDF. So I'd encourage you to use a handout. Really, create a handout. It may seem very silly, but it's important. And your handout should not be a copy of your slides, nor a script of what you're saying. If it's a copy of your slides, your audience will look through all the slides and then stop paying attention to you. Same for a script. Maybe you're like my wife. If I handed my wife a script of what I was saying, she would take a pen and mark a check mark when I got to each new line. Right? They're stopped paying attention to what you're saying. They're just listening for the words so they can follow along. In the handout I provided, normally I would not use a digital handout. And the reason for not using a digital handout is because you've got to use something else to look at it, whether it be a laptop, an iPad, a phone, and immediately I'm going to lose the audience. But because of what this is, it's there. If you want to look at your handout, I've just included some information on technology that I don't have time to present in this. Presenting in 30 minutes with questions on this topic is a bit fast. So I want to make sure that you had extra information there. The one thing I do want to draw your attention to on here is there's 2 things on the handout. If you're using sound, bring your own speakers. Trust me, I've used other speakers before and it doesn't work out. You can get a nice pair of desktop computer speakers pretty cheaply, and those will work for most small settings. And presentation clickers are great. That way you don't have to keep walking up to the computer and hitting a button to advance your slides. They can be found pretty cheaply. Your phone may even be able to be used as one. I'd recommend not using your phone, but you may be able to. I used the example of what I use, but you don't have to use that one. It's up to you, but I think if you can get access to a presentation clicker, it'll make your life better. Still on handouts. Keep the info light but useful on the handout. Notice that I have 1 page in the handout and I have 2 topics that are covered there. That's it. I don't want to drag your attention too much away from the presentation. I've taught long enough, and if any of you are teachers out there, you'll know the second you give somebody a ton of information and say, don't read this yet, look at this later, they're going to pour all over it. Right? And so again, if you have a lot of stuff on your handout, you're going to lose your audience. They're going to pay attention to your handout and dig through your entire handout. If you put very little information on there, it's not useful. And I think my handout is just a little bit above useless. Right? I don't have a ton of information on there, but what I have on there is good information. Include your contact information on the handout. Right? In case people want to reach you, if they have questions, it's important to have your information out there. Okay? Once you are done presenting at that conference and you drive home, once it's over, if somebody has a burning question about it, make it easy for them to find you. Don't make it have to, find the conference organizer on Facebook, send them a message, hey, who was the guy or girl that did a presentation on this? How can I get a hold of them? All that. If they have your contact information, it's really easy to reach you, and it will give you some good feedback and follow-up questions. Before the day of the presentation, please practice. Don't wing your presentation. You should have given your presentation probably 2 or 3 times. I'd encourage you to find an audience to give it for. Maybe you're going to present at the next in-person judge conference that happens, let's say, in May. Right? Before you go to that conference in May, you ask at your local game store. Maybe there are 3 or 4 people that you know that could listen to your presentation and give you feedback. This prevents a lot of stalling and ums. This helps look at your pace. Maybe you give this whole presentation and everybody is lost because they don't understand where you're coming from. And so that gives you some time to revise. Don't wing it. I promise. It will go much better if you go through the presentation. Practice talking louder and slower than you normally would. If you give a presentation at normal conversation speeds or normal conversation volumes, your audience will have difficulty understanding you. I don't talk like this in normal speech. Write out a script if you're more comfortable with that. I had to do a major presentation as part of my PhD work. It was an hour-long presentation in front of a committee whose job it was to quiz me at the end and ask me questions about my topic that I wouldn't have thought of and that were trying to stump me for 20 minutes after I gave this presentation. I wrote out a word-for-word script while I was preparing for that. Mind you, I'd already been doing this presentation by that point, but I wanted to write a script to make myself more comfortable, knowing that I had a panel of 5 experts in the field sitting in the audience. It went very well. By the time I needed to present, I didn't need the script word for word, so I was just able to refer to it as needed. Before the presentation, ask questions about the technology. I asked Isaac questions about how are we presenting this? Is it screen shared? Can I use webcam? Those type of things because I wanted to know. If I waited till 1:29 to figure out how to do this presentation, you guys were not going to have a good time. I would look bad. And it just would be not a great example of what a presentation could be. Questions about technology are especially important when you are giving a speech in a large lecture hall or a large conference room, things like that, when there is a projector that is not right in front of you. Maybe it's hanging from the ceiling and you have to use other cables. You need to make sure you know, am I using my computer? Am I using someone else's computer? How is my picture and sound being transferred to the projector? All those things are important questions. Don't just wait till the day of to ask this. Maybe you have to go out and buy a $10 piece to hook your Mac computer up to an HDMI cord. Maybe it's more than $10, but you need to know these things so you don't show up. Ideally, test out the technology. If you can get to the presentation site before the conference and check it out, great, do that. Before the day of the presentation, still, choose an outfit to wear. That sounds really silly to think about. Okay? But I knew what I was going to wear today even though you weren't seeing me. Right? So what is appropriate for the event? If I'm presenting at some place that everybody is in, shirt and tie, I'm going to wear a suit. Dress better than your attendees if at all possible. Okay? There have been educational studies that show that if you dress up as the teacher, as the presenter, beyond what your students or your attendees are listening to, or dressed as, you will have better attention. Right? So I thought, there's no way. And I did a little experiment when I was teaching middle school about 10 years ago. And I had 2 classes that were, for all intensive purposes, identical. Same subject I was teaching, same level of students. The ratio of all the different types of students that I had in that room were for the most part the same. One class I taught with a tie, one class I taught without. I had better behavior, performance, and learning in the classroom that I had a tie. I didn't change a thing. All right, but studies have shown that if you dress better, it does impress something upon your audience. Groom yourself. Get a haircut, take a shower, brush your hair. These are things I shouldn't have to say, but I've watched magic judges present that have not done any of these things in quite some time. Remember, we want to represent not only ourselves, but our region, our judges program. Right? You want to look well put together. And if you've got hair covering your face, if you've got ungroomed facial hair, if you have it looks like a rat nest living on your head, and you smell bad, that doesn't look good for the judge program, for you, and your audience is going to get away from you at the first chance. Communicate with the organizer often. I kind of failed at this one this time. But make sure that you are on track and know everything you need to know. Email, Facebook, phone call, text message, whatever works best. And don't be afraid to ask them questions. Okay, that's the only way you're going to know. This was the first one of these events, so we needed to know. What was going on and how things were going to happen. So questions were the best to wear. John, I get that. Um, I'm not saying like wear a tuxedo or anything. I like today, if I was presenting, I probably would wear do the cool professor look and wear the blue jeans and the blazer and the button up. Uh, but yeah, you don't like if I showed up to a judge conference wearing a ball gown, it would look funny for many reasons. But it would definitely be overkill on the dress up. On the day of the presentation, take a shower, shave, brush your teeth, groom yourself. Please, please, please put on deodorant. Every judge conference I've been to has been in a small location, and if you are not doing these things, people will not want to be around you, nor have them speaking directly at you. Leave earlier than you think. The last judge conference I went to, just as an attendee, it was about a 3-hour drive. I left with about 45 minutes early and was fine. One of the presentations had to be put out of order because they had a problem on the way that they weren't able to take care of in time. So in case anything goes wrong, leave early and arrive earlier than you need to. Don't show up 10 minutes before you're supposed to speak. Show up early so you can uh, do things like make sure you have a name tag. And double check the technology, right? When the last judge conference I was at, we had a presenter who could not hook up his computer to the projector for some reason or the other, and we didn't find that out until his time had started. So his presentation got cut short because we had to take his presentation, email it to one of the other presenters, have them hook up to somebody's phone to get Wi-Fi, download it to their computer, and then start. And so the whole thing felt rushed. Double check technology. Run through all the slides. I did this immediately before I screen shared. I made sure there was no issues, that all my art was there, my transitions were there. Check your zipper. Trust me. Right? I am the king of forgetting to zip up my pants for some reason. My wife tells me all the time. I'm getting to the point where I have coworkers that have told me, right? Just make sure before you walk in front of a group of people to do that. It's embarrassing. And turn off your phone. Leave it in your pocket. There will be pauses in this. You might have a presentation that requires people to write some things down or answer some questions or speak from the audience. There is nothing worse than doing any of those things and looking up to see the presenter checking their Facebook account. Put the phone away. You'll survive without it, I promise. The presentation itself. Be confident. Remember, you're the expert. You are talking in a training method to the people around you. Right? To do that, stand tall with great posture. I am about 5'10". I was the short kid growing up. I'm glad I made it to 5'10". In my dreams, somewhere I'm going to grow about another 3 inches. But when I'm presenting, I stand like I'm like 6'11". Like, speak loudly. Everyone will want to hear you. Now, unless you have a microphone, you need to make sure your voice projects enough so the people in the very back will understand you. Speaking loudly also is a nice confidence boost, right? It makes you look more like the expert, more like the big confidence person. If you're using a microphone, when I use a microphone for presentations, I still talk louder than my normal volume. Typically at presentations with a microphone, there's somebody else that will adjust the volume as needed. If that's not the case, then before you give your presentation, you just need to do a sound check with the microphone and tell people no. Speak slower than you need to. Again, this is important. For everyone to understand you, you need to speak slower, especially in an environment where you're going to have people that English is not their native language. For them to get the most out of your presentation, it helps for you to speak slower. And make eye contact with your audience. It's a sign of care that you look at somebody in their eyes. Now, don't stare at them and try to eat their souls with your eyes, right? But just glance at their eyes. Now, maybe that makes you uncomfortable. You can fake eye contact by looking above their head. If you look at the hair right on top of their head and just past it, they're going to think from that angle in front that you're looking at them and giving them eye contact. Eye contact also helps to read their understanding. You can read a lot about people through their facial expressions. Don't stare at the screen. I mean, I've seen so many presentations where the presenter turns around, reads the screen, turns back to the audience. Don't do that, please. The screen is not for the presenter. The screen is for the audience. It's for the audience to get those key points. Right? Your notes, if you need them, should be on a podium somewhere. Or you could be real fancy and do one of those presentations that has a monitor facing you if you need it. This computer presentation right now, it's kind of cheating for me because I have to look at the screen. If you wrote a script, refer to it as needed. Don't read off it word for word. It just becomes boring, monotone. Your audience is going to sleep. You should be familiar with it because you've practiced. I've got a couple more minutes, so let me get through the rest of these, and then we can have some time for some questions. Some people will walk around the room. I do a lot when I present, but if that's being a distraction or it's not possible in the environment you're in, don't. I often teach a lot of my classes from behind the students taking notes so that I don't get in the way of looking at the screen. There should be pauses in your presentation between topics. I am not so great at this in this presentation. The topics can all go one into one. This presentation is designed to be given in about 45 minutes, so I'm condensing it about 15 minutes for this. I haven't paused as much as I should. But your audience needs that to digest the information, and if they're taking notes. If they're taking notes, something I've learned as a teacher is that there's going to be one or two people in the room that are the slow note takers. And you want to wait on them as much as you can. Like right the second they're done, you want to move on. That gives you great pacing. And always leave time for questions and answers. There's going to be people that want to know things that you didn't think of. All right? And it's going to be more than the one person in the audience is going to have that question. Right? So you're going to help out the whole audience by taking questions. And if you don't know the answer to Q&A, you can always say, I don't know the answer to that, but that's a great thing for me to add to the presentation next time. Or you can say, well, that might be a great thing for you to research. I don't know the answer to that, but you might be able to find out for us. And if there's no time for Q&A or nobody asks questions, that's okay. Not everyone will have questions about your topic. All right? Of the about 12, 13 of you in this room, I would be just floored if 5 questions were asked. Then that's truthfully. It's a very low percentage of people that will actually ask questions, and that's okay. When you end with a slide that has your contact information. Some audience members may want it for a follow-up question. They may email you that question, or they may email you for more information. You might get an offer to do additional presentations. That's happened to me with this very presentation. I gave it at a conference, and then I found myself 4 months later giving it at another conference because somebody asked if I would. And always thank your audience and anyone who else assisted you during your presentation. So if you had a volunteer come up to ask questions, to hold something for you, to be an example, to demo, you want to thank them at the end after you've already thanked them. So that's it for me. Thank you all for being here. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, even though I sped through it. my email is my name in phone book form. It's johnsonmarkpatrick@gmail.com. My Magic Online handle is Miner, and I am CubeIsBetter on Twitter. I am looking at the chat. We have a couple moments. If anybody has any questions, feel free to type them into chat. I'll be happy to answer anything about presentations as I can. I do have my Cube on CubeTutor, but because I haven't updated it in like maybe since February, just because COVID has me not wanting to do it. My Cube is about out of 540, about 435 of it is signed. So typically I keep an Imgur account that has everything up to date in that, but I've just been having the tired COVID not wanting to do anything. So it's not up to date either. I think my Cube is linked in my Twitter profile, but I'm not sure about that. See two other people typing. And in question and answer, it's totally okay to say, all right, we have time for 2 more questions. We have time for 1 more question. And if people don't get their questions in, they'll email you, and it's okay.